My world shattered when I found lingerie in his suitcase that wasn't mine, a lace confession tucked between his neatly folded work shirts. His name was Adrian, and for 4 years, he was my entire universe. We met at a charity run organized by my hospital, a cliche of sorts. He was a charming corporate sponsor handing out water bottles. I was a slightly out-of-breath nurse who spilled hers all over his pristine white sneakers. He laughed it off, his eyes crinkling in a way that made my stomach flip, and insisted on buying me a coffee to make up for the trauma of wet feet. That was Adrian, disarming, attentive, and impossibly smooth. From that coffee, things moved quickly. He was a regional manager for a chain of boutique hotels, which explained his polish and his people skills. I, Sofia, was more grounded, my days spent in the controlled chaos of the cardiac ward. Our opposites attract dynamic felt electric. He brought spontaneity and adventure. I offered stability and a quiet kind of warmth. He'd surprise me with weekend getaways to quaint coastal towns, and I'd cook elaborate meals for him when his travel schedule was relentless. By our second anniversary, we were living together in the stylish loft apartment he'd chosen, all exposed brick and floor-to-ceiling windows that felt like living in a postcard. Adrian had a circle, mostly men he'd known from his university days or his early career in hospitality. They were a loud, confident bunch, always planning ski trips or golf weekends. Two of them, in particular, always set my teeth on edge. There was Grant, whose compliments to me always felt like appraisals of a piece of art, and Ben, who constantly joked about Adrian being tied down and domesticated. Adrian would just shake his head and call them Neanderthals, but he never shut it down, and the laughter that followed felt exclusive, a club I wasn't meant to understand. The trouble began subtly about a year ago. Adrian's company was aggressively acquiring smaller regional chains, and his role expanded. The occasional overnight trip became a weekly fixture. 2, sometimes 3 nights in different cities. "It's just the growth phase, Sophie," he'd say, kissing my forehead. "Once we're established, it'll calm down. Think of the bonus." And I did. We started talking about a future, a house, maybe even a family. The travel was an investment in that dream. Initially, he was impeccable about communication. He'd text me photos of his hotel room views, call me before bed, and bring back little gifts. Local saltwater taffy, a scented candle from a boutique. The shift was glacial. The calls became shorter, then sporadic. The texts morphed from paragraphs to emojis. He started returning from trips looking not tired, but invigorated, with a restless energy that didn't match someone who just endured back-to-back negotiations. He'd head straight for the shower, a ritual I initially attributed to wanting to wash off travel grime, until I noticed he did it even when he arrived home late at night, long after any meetings would have ended. His phone, once carelessly left on the coffee table, became a permanent appendage. It always landed screen down. Notifications made him flinch. If I walked into the room while he was typing, his thumb would fly to lock the screen. When I asked lightly if everything was okay at work, he'd sigh. "Just stress, baby. You don't want to hear about franchising disputes and zoning laws." He began to speak in these vague generalities, his once sharp stories about difficult clients replaced by a bland, "It was fine." Productive. His friends' behavior shifted too. At a dinner party at our place, I went to the kitchen for more wine and overheard Grant say, "Gotta be smarter with the paper trail, Manitoba." A beat of silence followed my re-entry. Ben quickly asked Adrian about a football score. A cold knot formed in my chest. My own sister, Nina, had gently probed a month prior. "He's gone a lot, Sofia. You're not worried." I defended him fiercely. His career is taking off. I trust him. The definitive crack appeared 2 months ago. He was scheduled for a crucial networking conference in Phoenix, a 5-day affair. The communication was virtually nil. My calls went unanswered for hours, returned with a terse. In a seminar, can't talk. The night he was supposed to be at a gala dinner, I called at 9 p.m. his time. He answered on the fifth ring. Voice hushed, background suspiciously quiet. Can't talk. The keynote speaker is about to start. In a silent ballroom, my heart sank. He returned bearing an expensive necklace, his apologies lavish. I'm so sorry I was MIA. The schedule was insane. My phone died constantly. He booked us a romantic dinner. The gesture felt heavy, like a counterweight on a scale trying to balance an unseen debt. The dam broke on a Tuesday. He was in the shower after a quick overnight trip to a city only an hour away by flight. His laptop, which he used for work, chimed with an email notification. A wave of something, dread, resolve, washed over me. I knew his password. We'd use it to stream movies. I opened it. It wasn't an email that caught my eye, but a browser tab left open. It was a dating site profile. His profile. The photos were recent. One I'd taken him on our balcony just weeks before. The bio was a masterpiece of fictionalization. Frequent traveler looking for genuine connections and spontaneous adventures in new cities. My hands trembled as I clicked through his messages. They were a horrifying travelogue of deceit. Conversations with women in Atlanta, Seattle, Denver, all cities and dates corresponding to his work trips. Plans for drinks, compliments exchanged, and in some, clear references to meetings that had already happened. Last night was amazing. One read, the sound of the water stopped. I stood frozen, the glow of the screen illuminating my shock. He emerged, towel around his waist, and saw me. The color drained from his face. Sofia, I can explain. How many? My voice was a stranger's. It began with denials, then trickled truth. It was just chatting, an ego boost. Then maybe one meetup. Finally, under the weight of the evidence glowing before us, a shattered admission, a handful. It didn't mean anything. It was a stupid coping mechanism for the pressure. He loved me, only me. He was sick. He needed help. He would change. The words were a torrent of self-pity and pleading. I felt numb. I told him to leave, to go stay with Grant or Ben. He begged, cried, but I was an iceberg. He packed a bag, his movements clumsy with shock. The silence after he left was deafening. Then the grief hit, a physical, racking pain. But beneath it, a fiery anger grew. I needed to know the scope of betrayal. Over the next 2 days, fueled by a cold fury, I became a detective in my own life. Using his saved passwords, I accessed his travel portal and credit card account. The story they told was meticulous and damning. The conference in Phoenix? His flight was to Las Vegas. The hotel receipt showed a king-size room with minibar charges for champagne and strawberries. There were 2 dinner charges every night of that trip at romantic, intimate restaurants. I cross-referenced dates with the dating site messages I'd frantically screenshotted. It was a perfect, horrifying match. I found bookings for cozy inns in Napa Valley and Nashville, locations his company had no business in. The deepest cut came from his text history with his friends. A group chat titled The Wolf Pack, the irony made me nauseous, was a playbook for deception. Grant offering advice on hiding app notifications. Use the discrete icon setting, idiot. Ben suggesting cover stories. Tell her the client wanted to meet at a brewery. It's more believable than a steakhouse. They had been his lookouts, his alibi crafters. They'd even fielded my calls when he was unavailable. The camaraderie I'd witnessed was, in part, a pact of secrecy against me. When I confronted him over a phone call, his voice broke. He admitted it all. The systematic use of work trips, the aided and abetted lies. He claimed it started as a one-time mistake after a boozy client dinner a year ago and spiraled. He blamed his friend's influence, his own insecurities, the high of it. He offered to quit his job, to go to therapy, to cut off every friend. You are my life, Sofia. But the life he described was a fiction. My life had been a shell, propped up by his lies. The problem isn't just the other women, I told him, my voice steady despite the storm inside. It's the 1,000 lies you told to my face. It's you making me feel paranoid when my gut was screaming the truth. It's your friends laughing with me while helping you cheat. I don't know you at all. I moved in with Nina and her wife, Carmen, the next day. I told Adrian not to contact me. He ignored this, of course. My phone became a prison of pleas, voicemail sobbing apologies, text promising rebirth, flowers delivered to Nina's doorstep with notes written in a desperate scrawl. He began circling the block in his car. Carmen, a no-nonsense attorney, finally stepped out one evening and told him the next drive-by would result in a police call. It stopped for a day. I knew I had made a clean break. The loft, with its beautiful cold windows, was a crime scene. I couldn't go back there with him present. I learned from a sympathetic colleague at his office that he was due for a mandatory 2-day leadership retreat at a remote lodge, a company-wide event with strict attendance. It was my window. Nina and Carmen helped me rent a van. We went to the loft on the first morning of his retreat. Packing my life into cardboard boxes felt surreal. I took only what was unquestionably mine, or what I bought. I left the expensive necklace on the kitchen island. I wrote a final letter, brief and unemotional. I stated the relationship was over, that I knew the full extent of deception, and that any further communication should go through my lawyer. Carmen had volunteered. I said I wish him no ill will, but needed a complete and permanent separation. We changed the locks, forwarded my mail, and I closed the joint account, taking my half of the savings. I felt a terrifying, exhilarating sense of freedom as we drove away. That night at Nina's, I slept for 10 hours straight. Adrian returned from his retreat early the next afternoon. The barrage started immediately. First, confused texts about the locks. Then, the tone shifted to panic, then rage. The voicemails became unhinged. You can't do this. After everything I've offered to do, you're throwing us away? He showed up at Nina's house by dinner time. Carmen answered the door. He was disheveled, his eyes wild. Where is she? She can't just ghost me. We need to talk. She doesn't want to see you, Adrian. You need to leave, Carmen said, her voice firm. This is between me and Sofia, he shouted, trying to peer past her. Nina appeared, placing a hand on Carmen's shoulder. You need to go now, Nina said, or we're calling the police. He jeered. Call them. I just want to talk to my girlfriend. Ex-girlfriend, Carmen corrected coldly. And you're trespassing. Something in him snapped. He shoved past both of them into the foyer. Sofia, get down here. Be an adult. I was hiding in the upstairs guest room, paralyzed with fear. His voice was a weapon, stripped of all its former charm. I heard scuffling, then Carmen's sharp cry, "Get out!" I crept to the top of the stairs. Adrian was in the living room, facing off with Carmen. Nina was on the phone, speaking rapidly to a 911 operator. Adrian saw me. There you are. Just give me 5 minutes. You owe me that. You owe her nothing, Sofia. Nina yelled. Adrian lunged for the staircase. Carmen moved to block him. In a flash of violent motion, he swung his arm, backhanding Carmen across the face. The sound was sickening. She cried out, stumbling back into a side table, which crashed over. That sound broke my paralysis. Stop! I screamed, racing down the stairs. He looked from Carmen, holding her bleeding mouth, to me, his expression oscillating between fury and sudden, horrifying clarity. She grabbed me. I didn't mean to. The sirens were already wailing in the distance. Nina stood protectively in front of Carmen, her phone still raised. They're here. You're done. The next minutes were a blur of blue and red lights. Police officers filled the space, their calm professionalism a stark contrast to the emotional wreckage. Carmen gave a clear statement, pointing to her split lip. Nina and I corroborated everything. Adrian, suddenly meek, kept saying it was an accident, a misunderstanding. He was read his rights and led away in handcuffs, casting a final, bewildered look my way, as if he were the one betrayed. At the hospital, Carmen got stitches. The physical wound would heal, but the violation to our sanctuary would not. Adrian was charged with assault and trespassing. He was released on bail the next day. His lawyer contacted Carmen, pressuring us to drop the charges, talking about proportionality and a man's career. We refused. Carmen, as both a victim and my lawyer, was adamant. This is the consequence. Not just for cheating, but for the entitlement that led him to believe he could force his way back into your life. We filed for a restraining order, which was granted immediately given the criminal charges. The legal process is ongoing, a slow, grinding machinery of accountability. But for me, the closure is already here. The man I loved was a carefully constructed facade, and his final, violent act shattered any lingering illusion or guilt. I found a small apartment with a view of a park, not a skyline. I started therapy to untangle the knots of betrayal and rebuild my trust in my own judgment. I reconnected with friends I'd subtly distanced during my relationship with Adrian. Sometimes in the quiet of my new home, I feel the echo of the pain, the humiliation of having been so thoroughly fooled. But more often, I feel a profound sense of safety and self-possession. I learned that the most dangerous lies aren't the ones told in secret, but the ones we help build around ourselves when we ignore the quiet, persistent voice of our own truth. I listened to mine just in time.